All right, welcome to session 2 of Tavern Ramblings. Ugh, I can speak from Lizards and Locations. This is John, brought to you with also.
Going great right out the gate. This is Andrew as well from Lizards and Locations.
Yeah. All right. So after our first session, we talked a little bit about martial classes and some interesting stuff that we kind of brought up to it. Now we're looking at the arcane classes. And so when I think arcane, I think sorcerer, warlock, wizard, bard, artificer. Is that pretty much who you have as well on yours?
Yeah, that's what the book says are those, so we really can only go with what they say.
Yeah, and I was like, man, because we haven't really talked about Blood Hunter at all. I wasn't sure if we should include them or not because they're not originally a part of it. But even as artificer, if you think about it.
Yeah, Blood Hunter is just not an officially licensed thing in the books that we're using at the moment. So, I mean, Blood Hunter is just its own special little niche thing that I don't think it necessarily needs to be talked about. If we wanted to do a thing about it, we could probably just do an entire frickin' episode about made-up ones or like non-canon ones.
Oh, true. Yeah, that would be kind of a cool thing to do. Especially when you get in subclasses, because there's so many great subclasses out there as well.
People have made some very interesting subclasses, and they've made some pretty weird ones too. So it would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah. So I was thinking about each one of these has kind of their own identity. You know, sorcerers have the sorcery points. The warlocks have the eldritch invocations, as well as the pact magic. The wizard has the spell book, which is actually really exclusive to them. The bard is kind of like a little bit of everything, but they have the inspiration. And then an artificer is kind of its own unique thing as well, with the ability to create innovations that have, arcane capabilities.
Yeah, and it is good that they have their own specific ways to do all their mechanics. Don't forget the bard also has their like the bardic knowledge or whatever knowledge they have. I forget the actual name of the mechanic, but they can basically just take a spell from any other spell book and just put it in theirs. So
yeah, and the College of Lore is really strong in that.
Yeah, College of Lore like specializes in that kind of thing, but I'm pretty sure all of them get it. All schools get it, or all colleges get it. But the lore one is the one that has the most instances of that particular mechanic.
Yeah. So let's get this started with kind of some questions for you. So my first question, like with Marshall, do you have a favorite, a favorite arcane class?
Man, do I have a favorite arcane class? That's such an yes. Warlock is my favorite class in the game. I very much enjoy playing Warlocks pretty much exclusively. I've played like 4 or 5 different characters of Warlocks just in Dungeons & Dragons, not even counting like different systems and video games and all that kind of good stuff. I have a Warlock going right now in Baldur's Gate 3 because like as much as I like Will, it's like, nah, I want my own guy. I want him to do my own thing. You can sit on the sidelines. Yeah, actually, Warlock is my favorite for sure.
Will's actually sitting on the sidelines for me as well. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because I think my favorite one is the Bard. Like, I have to say think because, like, I like a lot of the arcane classes. I think they're all done extremely well. But the Bard is just so big for me in my personal life. Music is a huge part of me as I teach percussion, and I think I relate to it the most. I also like that it's kind of like the Renaissance man. They do a little bit of everything. And that's a play style that I really like, the ability to succeed in whatever they put their mind into.
Yeah, why are we recording so late today? Why don't you let everybody know what...
Yeah, we're actually recording this one. It's 10 for us right now as we're recording this because I just spent 4.5 hours doing drum maintenance. So essentially my drum line, we need to do clean the shells and put new heads on. We got new wraps, and then I had to tune every single drum. So yeah, definitely a big part of my life is music.
Yeah, no, for sure. And bards just have that kind of skill expression that you can use with bards, where like they get so much stuff, and there's so much stuff you can do that it's almost hard to recommend them to newer players. I wouldn't really necessarily recommend any of the arcane classes to a new player. At least not one that's not a half caster, maybe an artificer.
Yeah.
But Bard, even though I believe they're are they even a half caster anymore? But like even if they were a half caster, it's so difficult to like kind of wrap your head around all the things they can do, that you're gonna go through this game and you're gonna be like, oh man, I could have done this back then. Oh, I could have done that. Oh, I forgot I had this. I forgot I had that. It's just frustrating for newer players to like have all of that stuff that you're not used to handling.
Is Wizard like your second favorite? Because I know you like Wizards a lot, it seems.
Actually, I don't know. What would my second favorite be? I think I prefer Sorcerers from a RP standpoint to Wizards. I like meta magic. And and the only Wizard character I actually have at the moment is a Blade Singer, which is like about as far away from a Wizard as you can get while still being a Wizard.
Yeah, that's a very good point there. It's kind of like a Hexblade Warlock almost.
Yeah, well, she was initially supposed to be a Sorcerer. And then I was like, okay. I've made so many charismatic style characters. Like, what would the difference between her and Saphira from The Longest Road be? And my answer was like, not a whole lot. She probably would be pretty similar. And then once Mary and I decided that we were going to have like twin characters and they were going to inverse their spells, and we were both going to have like the cool Rage plus Blade Singer like
dynamic duo.
Yeah, like the enhanced states they both get. Like, okay, this sounds so much cooler than like the really fledgling idea that I had. And I was like, I had no problem wholesalely throwing it out. I'm like, nope, Blade Singer Wizard, let's go. I finally get to play a character with high intelligence.
Yeah, I think Sorcerer is my second favorite because I love the idea of an innate power. You know, which is kind of weird because like, you know, when I'm a teacher, like I like education. Wizard is obviously like a big part of my life too. Mm-hmm. The idea of school, but Sorcerer was something that clicked with me in a different media. I'm thinking of like the X-Men. Yeah. The idea of an innate power, the mutation that allows them to have these amazing, ridiculous powers. I was like, oh, Sorcerer kind of has that vibe to it, right? I feel like you can make a subclass called like the Mutant, you know, or something like that, and it would fit very well into that idea.
Yeah, I could see that. And the biggest reason why I like Sorcerer above Wizard, just because of my background that I have, is back in 3.0, if you wanted to be a Wizard, they were the most powerful class. They probably still are. But you had to go through and prepare the amount of spells you wanted, like, every single time. And there was no, like, oh, I prepare this and I can cast it as many times as I want to. If you wanted to cast Fireball twice, you had to select Fireball twice. And that was like the amount of slots you had, and you had to like, it was very granular, it was very specific, but they had by far the most leeway and the most flexibility in terms of spell casting, and that hasn't changed, honestly. But yeah, it was just easier to pick Sorcerer and be like, oh yeah, I like this spell, this spell, this spell, this spell, this spell, and I could just cast them whenever I wanted to.
So like piggybacking off of that idea of kind of rating them against each other, when we think about, you know, when you purely min-max them, does the Wizard beat the Sorcerer, in your opinion?
Yeah.
Like, because they have so much access to spells, right? You know, the spell book is such a strong feature.
No, the Wizard is always, and should always be, the most flexible caster, and if not the most powerful one, they should have the most options. Because, like, you think of all of the different schools they have just in the player's handbook, and then they even more expand on that in like all of the complementary books. Like you've got the chronological wizard, and then you have like
the chronology,
then you've got the gravity wizard. You have all this other cool stuff that you can do. And like, does it compare to the divination wizard because they have 2 portent dice and those are kind of broken? Like maybe, but the point is that the wizard just kind of has so many options that it's hard to compete with.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the big selling point of Sorcerer is the sorcery points, the meta magic, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, all of these different meta magic options are weighted differently as well. Like, you know, Quicken Spell is useful, but it's using it for a cantrip. Yeah. You know, like, realistically, to me, the stronger of the ones is probably Twin Spell.
I love Twin Spell. Yep, absolutely.
It's a really cool idea. It's like, hey, hold person. Hold person twice.
Yeah, man. And like, you could do stuff up to like disintegration, like anything that requires just one. Like now, it's basically doubles the power of higher level spells. It's crazy.
That is a very strong meta magic option. And then I also like I think it's not extended, it's like the distant, I think it's distance spell.
Yeah.
Where it like essentially doubles whatever your distance is. That makes something like Firebolt, a basic cantrip that has already 120 feet or something, like whatever it is for its distance. Now we're looking 240 feet. Like, try running away from me now. You know, with something like that.
Yeah, doubling the range of something is pretty crazy. And honestly, being able to cast a spell that usually requires touch at 30 feet, that alone is pretty good.
Yeah.
Depending on your build.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thinking about like things like haste and stuff like that, and where gosh, yeah.
Yeah. And then like extended spell, that's really good if you're trying to be like a debuffer or a buffer for like a support character, which a lot of sorcerers aren't. That's not where their headspace is at. But if you wanted to do that, you know, that's pretty good. Extended spell is really nice.
Yeah, and you can pair that with something like, I was thinking like Warcaster feat. So now you have advantage on your concentration checks, and you're extending your time. Like, oof, that could be dangerous.
Yeah. And then subtle spell, which it's not used as much as it used to be, because I remember back in 3.5 it was used a lot because there were a lot of instances where you would be silenced or like entangled, and like there was a lot of rules where you couldn't cast spells under this specific circumstance. So like, oh look, a silence spell, like that's way more effective now in 5th edition because a lot of players don't understand how to get around that. Like if you're a caster and someone casts silence and they're just like, oh shit, well now what do I do?
Yeah.
So sorcerers could get around that. I mean, they still can, but you know, people were more aware of it back then.
I actually grabbed it for my character Janus because I was building this underwater guy, and I was like, oh, it's hard to cast, you know, verbal underwater. What if I had subtle spell meta magic?
Yeah.
And so I built it with the idea that they're used to casting underwater. It's just an innate thing that comes with the Triton society.
Yeah. The meta magic, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. I tend to agree with you that twin spell is just kind of the best one that you can kind of go with. I mean, careful spell can be useful. Like they can all be useful, but twin spell is just the best one.
Yeah, and with the new, you know, with the idea of memorizing spells, like adding spells to your spell book, Wizard also, like we said, it has such a diverse repertoire. So, you know, their spell book, they could just find a really big bad, and you, as a DM, you could entice your wizards with spell books hidden around, you know. And so it's a really cool mechanic. I think actually all these arcane classes have a lot of fun RP, you know, that you can do with them.
I think they are the most fun to RP personally. Like I always have the most fun doing arcane nonsense, and like these characters that have either super high intelligence or super high charisma, and then their wisdom stat is dumped, so they make terrible decisions.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's such a fun way to make a character that doesn't necessarily have the sense of morality that a lot of characters might otherwise have. So like you have like the character like, oh man, this both, and like there are instances of both Saphira and Astra where they get like things get to them and they don't have like a super high wisdom score, so I role play them as like they don't have necessarily the tools to like deal with that internally. With Saphira, her charisma is 20, so she can kind of overpower, like to kind of like she knows what she wants to do, so it doesn't bother her as much. And then Astra has like 11 for charisma, so it kind of rattles her a little bit more because she doesn't have the same like sense of self that a character with 20 charisma would.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, kind of following that idea, going into, and I think we can deep dive into these classes based on how you use stats with them, right? So, how do you think about the physical versus mental stats when you think arcane?
Well, first things first, strength is going to be dumped, like it just is. There's no use.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have a use for it. Dexterity, you're going to want a little bit. You're going to want like probably +1 or +2 in dexterity, just to kind of give yourself a little bit of a survivability in the early areas before you get like all of your defensive spells and like mirror image and all that stuff. I mean,
you can pair it with the mage armor, right? If you get dex. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So you get your mage armor. Like now you're not completely fucked if something decides to attack you. Constitution, you should always have Constitution. I think that's like everybody should have Constitution as at least a tertiary stat because it's just so important to not die.
Yeah.
And then, with intelligence and charisma, that just depends on what flavor of arcane caster you are. Like, if you're a wizard, you're gonna put all your shit into intelligence. If you're a sorcerer or a warlock, you're gonna go into or a bard and that you're gonna put into charisma. And then artificer, to not leave anybody out, will go into intelligence. But it's just one of those things where you get to it just depends. And then wisdom is kind of a dump stat as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say with the 5 classes, three of them are charisma and 2 of them are intelligence, and so that's kind of interesting. There's actually, I guess, wisdom is saved more for the divine.
That is
portal,
usually how it is because druids and clerics both have wisdom, although paladins have charisma, which is like, all right, sure.
So awkward, but yeah. It would be interesting if you could. I know this is a weird concept, but casting with Constitution. That's when I think paladins, I think about Constitution. But that's another day.
Yeah, I don't know because that's so. Like I've talked about this before in group chats. Like you've heard of MAD, where it's like multiple ability dependent, where like you need all of these different abilities. If you have Constitution as a spell. As a casting thing, it's like having strength as your casting. It's like, well, then what's like why you might as well just
not do this?
Yeah, just put everything in strength, and your character is completely broken, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. It's just like, yeah. I mean, I understand the idea of like, I imagine you'd want to be like using your blood to fuel spells, and that would be your charisma or your Constitution, and like that's fine as a means to power spells, but I don't think it should be what you use to do like your damage or like from a mechanic standpoint. I feel like that's just not really the play. I think that's more of a role play affectation than anything that should be codified into a rule book.
Yeah, it's interesting because having this discussion directly after when we talked about Marshall, we had like 3 or 4 that were like, okay, you have to have this. You should try to have this. Maybe if you can fit this stat into there as well. But with like the Arcane, it's like, okay, charisma, intelligence. Like it's like you have to have this. At least make this an 18, and then like everything else we'll deal with. Yeah, based on your roleplay.
It's definitely more straightforward, kind of oxymoronically or maybe ironically, because you think that like there's so many things you can do with these classes, but like when it comes down to the statistics, it's like you're going to want this, you're going to want this, you're going to want this, and everything else can be ignored completely.
Yeah, and for anybody who's new to arcane casting, the reason why we're so adamant about having your spellcasting your spellcasting ability being your main stat is because your spell attack modifier will be affected by that. Your spell save DC will be affected by that. And then typically people of these classes usually specialize in those ability checks with that associated ability score. So like a wizard is going to be doing Arcana checks, so they're probably going to want to have intelligence, and so it's so heavily weighted into that primary stat. Yeah,
it's very, very specific, and then a lot of the times that'll add to your damage as well. Like you'll do a thing and it'll add your spellcasting modifier to the damage, like specifically with warlocks and agonizing blast. Like having +5 to damage is pretty good, especially when you get 3 attacks that do it. That's +15 to damage if you hit all of them. Like that's not nothing.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think warlocks, one of the paths or whatever it is, one of the packs, you when you do weapon damage, one of the features of it is that you use your spellcasting modifier for even just a weapon attack.
That I believe is limited to the Hexblade, and I'm pretty sure that's
the Hexblade.
That's a pretty high level thing when that happens.
Okay.
So yes, that does happen, but it's not like a level 5 thing. It's like I think it's like a level 13 thing.
Okay.
So you have to really dedicate to the warlock path if you want that kind of thing. And the Hexblade is probably the most popular one to not go deep into the warlock pool.
Mm-hmm. And And depending on your DM, you may want to boost certain stats if you plan on multi-classing. Some DMs are more strict with saying, hey, you have to have this much strength if you want to go fighter, or this much dex or something like that. So maybe your stats for your secondary and tertiary abilities might be based on your DM's rule of thumb as well.
Yeah, it's possible. Very possible. I mean, it is codified in the rules, but a lot of DMs are just kind of like, oh yeah, okay, well, throw that out. Like,
yeah.
If someone wants to be a paladin, if someone wants to be a warlock, like, does it make a lot of sense if you have 8 charisma to try and be a warlock? No, but it sounds hilarious. So, I mean, I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, I mean, my DM style for it is I care more about the reason for it. What is your roleplay reason that your characters want to do it? Because if you just want to do it for the mechanics, it's like, I mean, do you really have to do it just for mechanics? Like, what can you bring out of your character? What does your character get out of this? As a person.
Yeah. And, I do enjoy the idea of an artificer as well, just to kind of switch to the class that we haven't talked a lot about. Like, I love the idea of, once again, codifying the means that somebody makes something, because that's been such a nebulous area in Dungeons and Dragons for so long. Like, I don't know how it was before 3rd edition, but in 3rd edition, there was like a bunch of different things you had to do in order to make a magic weapon. So for them to just be like, hey, this is the class that makes magic weapons. Like, all the stuff that you see that's like not necessarily like the legendary artifacts, but like just like the rods and all of the little things you see in like the magic weapons.
Flame tongue scimitar and
yeah, exactly. Where like it was like, okay, these are the people that make that. These are the ones that do that. So now there's a reason for those things to exist. Because honestly, a lot of the times you talk to wizards and like, why would a wizard make a flame tongue scimitar? What they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make any sense that they exist, and now there's a reason for them to exist.
And it's such a cool idea too for like, I don't know about you, but like I think a lot about the profession of my character, and like, the idea of building a artificer blacksmith sounds just fucking cool. Like thinking about their profession, and for Long Road we've done it more than any of our campaigns. We really focus on what they're doing in their downtime, because we have so much downtime in the Long Road, you know? And so like I think Saphira does a lot of like crafting, kind of thing.
Yeah, she does a lot of, when she's not doing her artwork, when she's not making like sculptures and such like that, she does a little bit of alchemy. She does a little bit of calligraphy. She's like has a set of gem working tools that she kind of looks at the corner of her eye every so often, and then kind of goes back to doing what she was doing. It's like one of those things where like, oh man, it would be super cool to do that at some point, but she just has so many other things that she's like focusing on in her downtime that gem cutting just isn't one of the things that she's focusing on.
Yeah, and I think Artificer took that idea of what you do in your downtime and said, hey, let's make a class, dedicated to it. And, the world of Dungeons and Dragons, no matter what, you're set in, if you're in a low magic campaign, then maybe the Artificer's value is even more because there's so few of them.
True.
And if you're in a high magic campaign, maybe your Artificer is the average guy, that's a typical person. And there's so much lore you could do. There's so much NPC work. There's just so much you can do with the Artificer, and it's something I would like to kind of play with. I have that character in Strixhaven, Ragdor, and he's kind of fun because I was like, oh, let's make a little subclass out of him, and it's like, what can we focus on? Is there a specific material they like to work with? Is there a specific type of item like they like to create? It's just so roleplay heavy, and I love it.
Yeah, plus who doesn't want to be Iron Man?
Yeah, right?
Like, it's just cool. It's just pretty cool. It's just mechanically never sung to me to the point where I would want to invest an entire campaign into being one. But that's not, that's just me.
Yeah, it's and I haven't done it yet. And but I think about it. I'm like, you know what? Could I create something really cool with this? And I think the possibility is there. There's just so many other options I also want to try still. Like, I still haven't made my bard character. I would like to make a bard character at some point, And so
hell, I have a bard character.
Yeah.
What the hell is up with that?
Yeah, what the fuck is up with that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's break this this deep dive for a second. Let's think about, I like what we did last time with the music.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had to think of like a music song of choice for these classes, we can just go down the order, starting with sorcerer. What do we got? What are we thinking?
Well, I've got one for sorcerer and wizard because they kind of go the same, like brand, or it applies to at least half of wizards and sorcerers. And that song is Fireball by Pitbull.
That's so good.
Like, what can you say? Like, yeah, that's like I tried to think of something like, man, what would a wizard want to sing like Fireball? Like, yeah, all right, write that one down.
For sorcerer, I was thinking of the light 'em up song.
Yeah, that's pretty good. There's also a song called "Born for This" by The Score that I really like for sorcerer.
Yeah, Born for This fits in with that really well.
Because like they say it, and like the song has a lot of lyrics about like warriors and stuff, but Born for This just kind of encapsulates the sorcerer and like their mindset for how they quote unquote acquire their powers.
Yeah,
So-
that's fair. Okay, what about warlock?
There's one that I thought of for that it was called Arsonist's Lullaby by Hosier. And it's a lot of like very solemn, and to me it seemed like one of those things where it was somebody looking for power that they didn't have, like they felt like helpless, so they were like, all right, I need to find some way to gain this power, and that is the warlock.
Okay, yeah, the idea of like, I do like, and I like that you mentioned the idea of helplessness, because maybe sometimes warlocks turn to a patron due to that feeling of helplessness, right?
Like they just, for whatever reason in their lives, they haven't dedicated their time to becoming a warrior, becoming a mage or a scholar, and then they find themselves in a situation where like somebody, like they need help from something, and like who do you turn to in that situation? Like, and what do they want in return for that?
Yeah. For me, for warlock, I was thinking of the Eminem song Venom.
Yeah.
Because the idea of a parasite is very much a patron.
Yeah, that's very true. And there's also the Hex Girl song from Scooby-Doo.
Oh my gosh, what a callback.
That was a pretty good one.
That was nostalgia right in the feels.
Yeah. Shout out to the Hex Girls for some awakenings for all of the, I was gonna say male, but like anybody really. I just yeah.
I have a weird one for wizard. I was thinking of, when I think of wizards, I think about the amount of studying, the amount of work they put in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought of the Fort Minor song, Remember the Name.
Okay.
Because it makes me think about all that work they put into, like the idea of remembering the name. And sometimes wizards have this goal to be renowned,
Yeah, absolutely. It's got that, the megalomania is definitely a risk for anybody who wishes to obtain that kind of like that power. Like 9th level wizard spells are very powerful, and you have to be a specific kind of person to not only reach for that kind of power but be willing to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. The consequences are huge.
Yeah, it doesn't really translate very well into the mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons sometimes, but the idea of 9th level spells are kind of horrific if you think about them.
Yeah, I mean, what level is Power Word Kill? Is that like a 7 or 8, or is that
Pretty sure
9?
it's 9.
Okay, yeah, I mean, just a word, Power Word Kill.
Yeah. Like, what kind of person would learn that spell, let alone employ its use? It's kind of crazy to think about.
Okay, so for Bard, this is a stretch. But I'm this is what I'm going to try to do here. You used to watch Psych. You remember?
Absolutely.
Right, the show Psych? Okay, did you ever watch the musical?
Yes.
Okay, so I love the musical, first of all. But
Surprising.
they used this song by James Roday, and he goes, "When you're making up a song," and he's just improvising a song, and I was like, that is the Bard's life. Like,
Yeah. I mean, if I was going to say like what a bard, like a character for a bard, like James Roday is pretty much right there, like a rogue bard.
Such a fucking good show.
Yeah, it's hard. I tried to think of something for bard, and I was just like, but bard is the music, so it's like you're trying to think of music for music.
For music,
it's like that doesn't really make any sense. So my default go-to is going to be Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh yeah. Oh, so good. Such a great choice. What a strong power move there. That's good. I like that.
Yeah. So that was that.
The music from the movie El Dorado fits really well into the vibe of bards I like. But that's just Elton John, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. For artificers, I actually had one that came up to me while I was driving back from getting food, and it was Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger by Daft Punk. And I was like, that sounds pretty much, it's like a cyberpunk artificer, but still.
Yeah, that's really good. I didn't think of this until you literally said the words "Who doesn't want to be Iron Man?" So I'm going with Iron Man.
Yeah, that's fine. Artificers also anything by the band the Cog is Dead, like that's a good one. Like because they have a lot of like steampunk kind of feel to them, and a lot of like a callback to that kind of like with gears and like cranks and that kind of thing. And there's a song that they sing called "The Girl and the Clockwork Dragon." Okay. It's very, and essentially the story is that there's this mechanical dragon that's kind of tearing up the countryside, and the king this non-named king starts throwing knights and like all of these like powerful individuals at them, and the dragon kills all of them because it's dragon. And then eventually this small girl who has a artificial heart, like a clockwork heart, goes up to it and it talks to it, and the dragon can hear the the clock ticking in her chest and like feels a kinship to her, and it's a very sweet little story, and I thought it worked well with Artificer's whole ideal.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. The one I thought about before, you mentioned the word Iron Man, was there's a person, a group called Woodkid. And Woodkid came up with a song called Iron, and it was used in the Assassin's Creed's Revelations trailer, and it was so well done. And I was like, oh, the sound of cogs and iron in the background, hammers and stuff like that. It has a really cool vibe for an artificer, kind of a darker vibe though.
Sure. I mean, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, Woodkid's interesting. They have a lot of kind of dark, kind of deep cuts that they do. They're pretty fun.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Breaking away from music, because I think it's all the classes, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
What is some of the positives and negatives you're seeing with the UA, like the Unearthed Arcana? What are they doing to the classes that's good or bad?
Wow. Let me tell you some of the thoughts I have about the Unearthed Arcana, specifically for Warlocks.
Warlock, there it is.
So, in the beginning of this whole playtest thing, back in the day when they had the vain hope of calling this project 1D&D, dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard. By the way, just call it 5.5. No one gives a shit. That's just what everyone's going to call it anyway. You're making a new system that's backwards compatible with 5th edition. It's 5.5. Anyway, they came out with this really cool idea for the Warlock where they were a half caster. And they got like a bunch, they have more invocations and they had all this stuff. And they were trying to get, and the reason that I saw for this was because I saw in other instances, they were trying to limit the amount of mechanical reliances on short rests. They were trying to move away from that kind of short rest idea and more into putting a long rest as the defining end of adventure thing that you do. And I thought it was really cool. I like more spells, especially because after looking at the invocations, they were giving you more invocations as well. So I'm just looking at it like, how is this bad? And like, obviously the trade-off was you don't get your spell slots back after a short rest. That was the trade-off. And like, to me, as someone who plays a warlock in a party where not everyone else is a warlock, trying to convince people to do a short rest is so kind of inept and so silly that a lot of the time what ends up happening is the DM, aka you in the situation, literally came up with an item that you gave short rests to people by drinking, and it was a drawback, like you got drunk because it was alcohol, but like that's essentially what warlocks need in order to do what they need to do. And honestly, when you do that to a warlock, they lose their kind of identity. And so I would rather give up this, like, and a lot of people argue like, oh, but getting your spell slots back out of short rest, like that's the whole thing about warlocks. That's what makes them good. It's like, sure, it makes them good in a very specific circumstance that a lot of times just doesn't make sense to do. It doesn't make sense to make a short rest for the one caster when everyone else is fine. It just doesn't make any sense. So I thought it was a good idea. And then, what was it, like a couple weeks ago, they reverted it. They were saying, oh, no, we'll just make it so now other people have to do short rests as well, and like give them a reason to take short rests, which is fine. I don't mind it. I would have liked to have more spells, but it's neither here nor there. But that's just my interpretation was, everyone is wrong. This is pretty cool. They should keep it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the playtest 7. For anybody who's followed along with those, it's the 7th playtest is when they decided to kind of bring that back. You know, take like, let's go back more towards the traditional form. And I think they're doing what you top out at 4 spells instead of 2 spells now. Is the way they're trying to go around it.
Yeah, and you still have the Mystic Arcanum, which gives you a 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th level spell per long rest. And that's how they get around having like 9th level spells on a short rest cooldown. But yeah, I don't know. I would rather have more cool stuff than necessarily get 9th level spells as a warlock. Like, it's obviously 9th level spells, very powerful. It'd be cool to have them. I don't want to keep it just to keep it. I would rather like say, okay, well, I'll give you this if you give me like some more cool stuff. Like, oh yeah, I don't get the 9th, 8th, 7th level spells, but give me like a bunch of cool subclass options, or more like a better something or other, or like cooler invocations that you can only unlock at like 17th level or some shit. Like, give me something else, because I don't necessarily need this thing that is more a wizard thing or more a sorcerer thing. If I wanted to be a charisma caster that casts 9th level spells, I would just be a sorcerer. Mm-hmm. So like, I don't really understand what the attachment was to that particular aspect of warlock personally.
Yeah, in a different kind of way, I liked some of the stuff they did with sorcerer. I thought sorcerer is now getting more of its, I guess you could say, its identity thrown into its actual class system.
For sure.
One of the things I was thinking about was in the new one they released, they mentioned, I think it's called, oh my gosh, something innate. I'll have to double check it later. But it was innate sorcery, that's what it's called, innate sorcery. And what it did was essentially at first level 1, right off the back, as a bonus action, you were increasing your spell DC by 1, and you get advantage on attack rolls that you cast, and you can use it twice per long rest. And essentially it lasted for a minute. And it was just a moment of like, I'm going to unleash my sorcerer fury, the thing that powers me. I'm going to be stronger at casting spells. I was like, that's fucking cool.
I also liked Sorcerer Rage. I thought that was pretty cool. I like Arcane Rage.
Yeah, and they did the Arcane Eruption, which sounded really cool.
Yeah, that was one of the coolest things that I saw in the UA for Arcane casters. Was like, oh yeah, you're a Draconic bloodline sorcerer. All right, well, you're gonna unleash your Draconic might. You're gonna grow like wings, and you can do all this. Like, you get a breath weapon, and like you just become like embody that kind of whatever it is that you are drawing your arcane power from. I'm like, that's cool as fuck, because like that's the kind of shit that like, if you can do innately, that will separate you from a wizard, because like a wizard might not be able to cast a spell to do something similar, like Tensor's transformation is a thing, but like they can't do that. That's cool as hell. And then like you think about that, like, okay, well, what would that look like for a Fey warlock, or what would that look like for a Genie warlock, or like name any of the other freaking like patrons? Like, that would be so freaking cool. Like, imagine one that does like the Celestials, and like imagine what that would look like if exploded in this arcane, just rush of energy. Like, that would be so cool.
Yeah. I don't know if you probably know more than I do about wizards, but there's this thing they're trying to do with memorize spell, where essentially you can you can all of a sudden remember a spell from your spell book that you didn't have prepared.
Right.
And I thought that sounds kind of cool. Like, it's a once a day kind of thing you can do. But it's like oh shit, I didn't prepare for this. But you know what? There is one spell I could pull out of my ass for this.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Just like give you
it's
a
like
little...
a 5th level feature. It's not super, it doesn't take forever to get it.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know. It's always a little iffy when you circumvent the basic premise of what you're doing. Like, yeah, you're like, because basically, like, and like, I know you establish a rule and then you have powers to break it. That's fine. I just don't know if that's the kind of thing that I would want, because there are so many other like cool things you could get. That one just doesn't do it for me, I guess.
Yeah.
Although I do enjoy that they gave the wizard like just create spell. Like, you just make up a fucking spell.
Yeah.
I thought that was fun.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Like, you know what? And I'm sure people would abuse it, but there's a lot of fun that could happen to it. I think it would make the game fun.
Yeah, I just think it's a good way to do, because we did this a couple times as well, where we'll look at like Kibble's Tasty Compendium or like Spell Compendium and stuff like that, looking for spells that are like other spells, but a different element, or like have a little bit different, like the crackle that Astra likes to use is essentially Scorching Ray, but with like a stun feature instead of the other thing that Scorching Ray has.
I am so, like, for me personally, elemental, like, if I was to play a wizard, it would be essentially working as a person who does elements. Like, that's huge for my playstyle. Is it evocation, right? Evocation.
Usually that's where the elements are located. Yeah.
And like, obviously D&D has this biasness towards fire, for better or for worse. I love that someone like Kibble's Tasty was like, hey, let's have some lightning stuff, let's have some ice stuff. I love that kind of stuff. Like, I love the flavor, more earth stuff, more wind stuff,
Yeah, wind is definitely overlooked. I mean, when like the most iconic thing about your IP is casting Fireball, like, there's really just so much you can do.
Yeah. Like,
they made Fireball and Lightning Bolt so blatantly overpowered that there's literally no reason not to use them. And they're not even like my favorite spells, but it's just, they're really good.
Yeah. But when someone goes, hey, let's make a spell that's called Ice Ball, it's like, fuck yeah, let's get it,
So, but like, my point is that now there's a way in the game that you can be like, okay, I'm gonna use create spell to make a freaking ice Scorching Ray or whatever. Like, it's codified in the rules now, and I think that's a really good idea. And I also really enjoy that the wizard is the one that can do it.
Yeah.
I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah, unless you have a specific feat that like changes what you're doing, because I know a lot of sorcerers tend to take the feat that like gives you a like an elemental adept, and it allows you to change the spells that you do to that particular element.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool, and I think that's fun. I think that the wizards having the ability to make whatever they want to means as if you needed more reasons to play a wizard. There's another one.
Well, I think this kind of brings us into our next topic, which is favorite spells. Like spells that, and they could be just powerful spells, but like, what are your guilty pleasure spells?
Guilty pleasure spells. See, that's different than favorite spells, I think.
That's true.
But I think you won't be surprised by this. My favorite spell is haste. I think haste is really good. I like that there are so many items and ways to get that kind of status effect as well. I like the fact that boots of haste are so iconic is kind of just, it kind of says itself. They're almost as iconic as a wand of fireball.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, absolutely. It has come, specifically and mainly 5e, it has really taken off.
Yeah, so I really like haste. A spell that I refuse to use, but I've recognized that it is very broken, is Silvery Barbs. It's so good that I don't use it.
It sounds great for like dueling, you know.
It sounds so good. There's no drawback to having it. You know what I mean? Like there will never be a situation where silvery barbs isn't a good thing to have. Like I guess you could say that for a lot of spells, but considering that silvery barbs is a first level spell, like they're not usually supposed to be that cut and dry good.
I think it's called broken is what they're called.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, sometimes it'd be that way.
I think my fave spell is Big B's Hand.
Oh, so good.
It's so cool. Like you could use it to like lift yourself up. You could use it to like punch things. Like it's such a cool ass spell. You know,
it has a lot of potential. It can do so many things. It's very fun.
I like the idea of. So I love arcane battles. So I know it's like very useful and it's a hot topic, but counterspell is just a cool spell. The idea that someone's about to do something to you and you go, fuck no, you're not. Like, you know, and like whatever happens and you cancel that spell. Maybe there's an Arcana roll that happens, but it's such a cool idea that I have power to stop you doing what you're doing.
Oh, counterspell. Oh, counterspell. It's such a good idea, but the way that magic is done in Dungeons & Dragons makes it such a fucking cockblock that I hesitate to say that it feels good to use.
Okay.
Like, it feels like... Because, like, here's the thing. It's one of those instances where, like, as a DM, I'm always like, okay, if you guys can do it, then I can do it. If you guys have this ability, then I can have this ability. Like, if you guys have this critical method, then I use the same one. And so the idea that everyone is using counterspell whenever someone casts a spell is just so like, all right, great. Well, then I guess I don't do that then. And I sit on my fucking finger and spin, I guess. Like, it's just one of those things where, like, it doesn't feel good to have it happen to you because it feels like there's nothing you can do against it. Like, they didn't make it, like, they might have made a roll if it's, like, a 6th level spell that they did that, but, like, that's a... It's a roll to do, but it's not necessarily especially difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, it just doesn't feel good to me. And that's why a lot of the time what I prefer to do is the dueling thing where, like, oh, he's going to use fireball, so I'm going to use, like, a wall of water or something like that. And, like, that would be a cool use of the reaction that you get, and I would rather have that for a maybe not necessarily everybody, but for specific classes, or maybe like as a feat or something. It might be fun, but just having a reaction spell that says no, you don't do that, is like, it feels against the spirit of the improv show that is Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah,
it's always supposed to be yes and counterspell is the no. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's also spells that I know, like, they're useful, but I think there's just certain representations that have happened in different shows and some of the ways that you guys as players have described that I've really just like, man, that's a cool aesthetic. One of those for me is in the second campaign of Critical Role, Fjord, Travis's character, is Armor of Agathis, and he describes it as this like frost coming off his skin and like the cold air breathing, like when you're in the frozen section, you know?
Yeah.
And like, it was just such a cool like thought. I was like, damn, yeah. I know it gives you temporary hit points, and then also it does damage when someone hits you with a melee. So it is useful, but I like the aesthetic of it more than the actual mechanic of it.
Yeah. I mean, the temporary hit points are an underutilized mechanic in 5th edition, besides, like, use it for, like, false life and then a couple of the healing spells at low level. You get a lot of temporary hit points.
Healing aid and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then once you get to, like, level 2 or 3, it kind of falls off the face of the earth for actual healing.
Yep, because it's like 8 or 10, and we're no longer doing only 8 or 10 damage.
Yeah, so, like, I think it would be cool to have either a higher level spell or the ability to upcast those kinds of spells to a more interesting degree. Because, like, the idea of getting, like, 60 temporary hit points through whatever is like, damn, that's a lot of goddamn hit points.
Yeah, and you did the trade-off by upcasting.
Yeah. So like I feel like temporary hit points is something that in the higher echelons of tiers of gameplay kind of gets forgotten, which is, a lot of things are like that. Like you don't usually end up seeing a lot of pack tactics when you're level 11 and 12.
Yeah. I like the aesthetic as well as the mechanic of shield. I think it's really well done. It's a +5 AC, so it has a cap, right? But also it's just the idea that something's coming at you and then, boom, some kind of thing, just a force field or whatever it might be, some power or what might be, knocks it away is a really cool mechanic.
I definitely like it more than Counterspell, I'll say that.
Yeah.
And I know it's like a lower level spell, so it's hard to compare it to, but first of all, countering Magic Missile, which is itself a very iconic spell.
Unblockable, yeah.
Is like, all right, cool. That gives it a specific niche, even outside of the times where you don't necessarily need 5 AC, even though my Blade Dancer loves that shit, or my Blade Singer loves that. It's like, oh man, you somehow beat my AC of 21, well, I'm gonna cast Shield and fuck you.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there certain spells, and actually you and I have talked about this, but maybe you want to share with them, are there certain spells you're like, we need to think about modifying for the purposes of 5e and playing as a DM?
God, there's so many. I would have to make a list.
Yeah, so I mean, I know we talked about as with race abilities, like the idea of flight, right?
Yes.
That's something we've talked about in the past. But I guess the ability of the spell fly, you're probably okay with, because they're actually taking the trade-off of casting it.
Yeah, I would say that the spell fly isn't necessarily I will say this, it's very powerful. Flying is very powerful. And it's not the power of the spell that annoys me as much from its use. The problem with fly, and a lot of DMs will say this, is once you give your players the ability to fly, every single encounter after that needs to keep that in mind. And the problem with that is that it limits the amount of cool encounters you can think of, because if someone can just fly and completely undo it, they will, because why wouldn't they? So it's less of a power thing, and oh man, I'm so powerful now that I can fly. It's more just now only so many things can hurt me, and so in order for the game to be interesting, those are the only things that you will see.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's time for another break with from this deep dive. Scenes from a Hat with Kat. Kat, you're joining us with a seat right next to me.
Oh shit!
What are we doing?
I guess I should probably hide the list of things to do from you.
Okay. Yeah, that would be good.
Way to remind me of that part. Roll a D13. I don't think I have a D13.
You're gonna make me roll a Carl Crawford dice?
I think a D13 is a thing.
Why you do this to me?
Because I forgot to ask people for more scenes. I don't know. Here, roll a D20 and see if it lands on something under 13.
7.
Good.
Thank God.
Ranger leading expeditions into a giant forest.
Ranger leading expeditions to a giant forest?
Yeah, like a
now are the
giant animals, plants, all sorts of stuff.
All right.
Thanks, Archie D from Mastodon.
Okay.
You probably don't listen to our show because it's brand new.
Okay.
But you're called out in it because you're cool.
Well, if it's a ranger doing this, then I think it's appropriate for you to introduce us to this particular improv scene.
Yeah. Crikey! Would you look over there? There's is that like a crocodile? Nope, that's not a crocodile. That's just a dead person. All right. So
how many legs does a crocodile usually have?
It typically has no more than 4.
Well, whatever that thing is, it's got a lot of legs.
It does, doesn't it? Oh God, what is it? Oh, I can't really tell what it is, but by the way, if you look to your left, that's a maple tree. Yeah, maple, beautiful, great leaves. Great sap, if you know what I'm talking about. Maple syrup. Anyway, back to the crocodile. So, or whatever the fuck it is, a racodile. That's a racodile. It has 8 legs.
Holy shit!
Oh god, that's got a lot of teeth.
Absolutely fucking terrifying.
You know, it's like the size of a Goliath, but like a Goliath who's like ate another Goliath. I think it actually has a Goliath inside its mouth if I'm looking at it right now.
Oh shit, it's Goliathception.
Oh, look at that bird. That's a really pretty bird over there.
Oh god, the bird is eating the arachnid.
Oh my god, it's a rock. It's a fucking ember rock.
Don't eat me, Dwayne.
Don't eat me, Dwayne. And scene. We didn't get through far in the forest.
I only got half of that, but it was fantastic.
Yeah. And now I hope that the Arachagator will haunt everyone's dreams.
A rock gator.
Arachnigator eaten by a rock.
Monster coming to a D&D campaign soon.
Yeah, let me just write something down real quick. No big deal.
Yeah.
No, don't worry about it too much.
Don't worry about it. Witherbloom might have these.
Shit, boy.
Let's do another one.
I've spawned.
2.
A botanical shop that sells the rarest of magical plants. Courtesy of Copos Art on Twitter.
Copos! Oh, by the way, if you haven't got a chance to check out Copos Art, they have some awesome art, by the way. That's a little thing I liked. I love looking at their art. All right, so it's a botanical garden?
Botanical shop that sells the rarest of magical plants.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to take this one?
Yeah, give me a minute. Let me think about this. This is
Counting down now. 60. 59. The choices.
All right. Yes, hello. Welcome to our magical plant shop. Patent pending. Please look around and see the rarest of all magical plants. This beautiful bonsai tree, instead of the usual brilliant green, is now slightly paler green. I know. Very, very impressive. It's been a extremely long time in breeding this particular magical plant. The just gentlest of seafoam greens just washing over you. And now if you look slightly to your left some more, you will see this one, instead of being green, it's blue. I know. Extremely rare, extremely valuable. Please keep your pants on. Do not overstate. I cannot overstate how rare these particular plants are. And if you look behind you, you will see that this other plant is eating one of our guests as we speak. Very rare, very impressive.
God!
It's almost.
It's eating me!
It's very.
Oh!
Yes. The most rare carnivorous plant in existence. Yes, it can. It can continue.
It smells so good in here.
It can continue to eat anything that you put near it, just without cease. So why don't you all just stand there and very much, and he's backing, and as I back away, I close the door and just let the plant eat everybody there.
Everybody there. I think it's an aloe. Oh god.
Yes, you'll need some aloe when you're done. Yes, thank you. Enjoy your stay. And then the door closes.
Door closes, locked. Oh god, let's do one more. That was good.
All right.
Certainly the most frightening plant shop.
You said up to 13?
Yes.
I rolled a 13.
Hot. A dragon cafe, like a cat cafe, full of tiny, cuddly, chicken-sized dragons.
What's a cat cafe?
A place you get coffee and cuddle with cats.
They just have cats roaming around? And feces? Like, what?
No, I assume the cats do their business elsewhere.
Oh, they don't poop in the cafe.
I would think.
Okay. Alright, so a dragon cafe with baby chick-sized dragons?
Tiny, cuddly, chicken-sized dragons.
Who's this one from?
RGD and Mastodon.
Alright. Mastodon represent, I see you.
Yeah.
Okay. This coffee, it's kind of hot. Do you heat it with the dragons here, or like how do you get it so? Oh, that's my tongue. Ow.
Yes, sir. All of our dragons have their own specific blend that they enjoy. I believe the one you are drinking right now is for a red dragon. Very spicy, very potent.
The dragons are so cute. I burnt my tongue, y'all.
Yeah, that's it. It does say on the sign outside, please beware of extremely spicy drinks and also exceptionally frigid drinks. There have been several guests who have gotten their tongue stuck on the outside of a glass for some reason I don't really understand, but it happened so many times that we, of course, had to put out a sign.
There's like literally, as he's trying to cool off his tongue, he has like a block of iced coffee. Like it's just frozen together. It's just sticking to his tongue.
Yes, indeed.
This is really weird.
It seems you are the perfect candidate to test out our extra strength medicinal herbal tea that one of our metallic dragons is special for. So here, let me slide you one of those so that you will heal all of the self-inflicted wounds you have put upon yourself. And as you're doing this, like there are like 4 or 5 dragons just kind of like climbing on top of this person.
oh, is that dragon meal? It says it's like a nice. It's
I'm,
good.
I'm sorry, sir. Our recipes are strictly confidential.
Well,
if I told you what they were, I would have to feed you to the dragons. I apologize.
Looks at the cutest dragons ever, but still in fear.
Yep.
Honestly, this sounds like the best cafe ever. No, I want to go to a cat cafe just to experience one of these.
I've been to a cat cafe a couple of times. It was very nice.
Was it like where was it in like St. Pete or where was it?
Yeah, it was in St. Pete.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it basically was one of those places where you could go, you could get like a little drink, and then like look at all of the adoptable cats. Like,
oh.
at the time, I already had cats, so I couldn't adopt them. But yeah, they were all very sweet.
All right. Well, scene. Thank you so much, Kat, for scenes from a hat with Kat.
Did you just hold out your hand like you were gonna shake my hand?
No, I was pointing to you so our invisible cameras can see that I'm pointing to you. Gosh, she's calling me out on everything over here.
Yeah, I see that.
And your wife, who holds out their hand for a handshake from their wife.
Yeah. Well, I also accidentally said pandemic to you instead of pansexual maniac to you today.
Everybody on the internet knows that.
All right. Well, we only have a couple more things to get through before we end this session. So, what's your favorite arcane subclass, Andrew?
Oh boy, my favorite arcane subclass. The one I've had the most fun so far with is definitely the Archfey Warlock. I have a lot. It's very much an RP thing though. So from a mechanical standpoint, I feel like the 2 most interesting ones is either the Divination Wizard, which is really good. Only like it's pretty good as well. And then I also very much enjoy the Divine Soul Sorcerer.
Oh yeah, that's a cool one.
That's a really fun one. And shout out to Jimbo Cocktoastin, Divine Soul Sorcerer. It's a lot of fun.
I'm so torn. You know, I have Janus is a storm sorcerer, and I love the idea of storms. It's like if I could control any element, lightning's always been my thing. You know, but I love Mercer came up with in one of his books the College of the Maestro for Bard, and I used Professor Zephi in our Strixhaven. He has that idea, so he's literally conducting the world, and he shifts that into music and spells, and it's the coolest thing. I think if I ever make a Bard character, I'll either make my own subclass like College of Percussion or something like that.
It feels like that's the most pure version of a bard, of like, because that's like the idea of their spell casting comes from feeling the world of music and drawing magic from that. So it seems like College of the Maestro is like it's the basic identity of the bard but turned up to 11.
Yeah, and I was gonna say it actually leads me into the next kind of talking point, which is the like arcane classes and other media, like other examples.
Sure.
The College of Maestro, there's this movie, I don't know if you ever saw, called August Rush.
I have not seen that.
And so I can't remember his name, it's the kid from Spiderwick Chronicles. And he was in a ton of like, I think he was in the Willy Wonka movie with Johnny Depp as the kid, as was it Charlie, right?
Yeah.
And he is this person who is like essentially, realistically, he's a savant at music, right? And he just hears the sounds of the road, and he lives, I think he's like New York City or something like that, and he takes all the sounds, and he's like 8 years old, and he's like doing music at a collegiate above level. And it was a really cool idea, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. So I kind of like, whenever I think Bard, I kind of just think of that every time, this kid who's just taking the sounds of the world and making music into it.
Sure, absolutely. Like the Bard is one step farther, which is taking the music of the world and turning it into magic.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, if we're thinking of other media, I don't know. I there are so many different ways that magic has been done, and a lot of the time they kind of tend to focus on either you can be a wizard or you can be a sorcerer. Very rarely does a lot of media have the ability
Separate
to do
them.
both.
Yeah.
Like either magic is inherent in an individual or magic can be learned by anybody. That's usually how IPs work, because they don't have the time or the resources to really like flesh out different ways that magic can be done. So
I have a question for you regarding this, and it just came to me, so I'm putting you on the spot. In the Guardian, you saw the Guardians of the Galaxy 2, right?
yes.
All right. Star-Lord, his like ability that he has to be a celestial, would you consider that more sorcerer, like he's born that way, or is that more warlock because it's fueled by the planet ego?
The problem I have with answering that question is because that movie is very, let's see, what's the word I want to use? Inconsistent with how it describes how that power works. Because from what Ego tells him, he should have that power inherently. But then he ends up not. So
after the planet's destroyed.
I'm assuming that he was just lying beforehand, and the power was granted to him. And in that case, he would be a warlock in the small times where he was able to use that power.
Okay.
If he was telling the truth and Star-Lord just has that power inherently, he would be a sorcerer.
Okay.
But
that makes sense to me.
Like it was very inconsistently portrayed in the movie, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, even I was thinking like, we mentioned earlier X-Men as a form of, you could say, sorcerer, and Venom could be an example of a warlock.
Yes.
Artificers. Is there any artificers that kind of come to mind? Besides like Lord of the Rings, Forging of the Rings. I guess Iron Man, like legit.
Yeah, like Iron Man. There's a couple of different superheroes in the Iron Man vein where they just are so technologically advanced, it becomes that, like in the same way that like Thor might be considered an artificer because he has like the big fucking hammer, but he didn't make that, so it's hard to say.
You could maybe use Peter Dinklage's character, the dwarf, that forged shit. You could maybe use
the dwarves in that mythology would be a pretty good artificer allegory. But yeah, there's not a lot of main characters that do like building that I can think of. I'm sure there are some out there, but yeah, no, I'm not sure about that part.
I'm blanking on her name, but the sister from the Black Panther.
Yes, she would be a good example as well, because like she just is so freaking smart that she is able to make things that other people can't, and because other people use them, it's like, okay, that's basically an artificer infusion item that they gave to somebody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times they end up being side characters, the artificers, it seems like, or their plot lines.
They are inherently, they feel very support class.
Yeah.
Like they're a half caster. They have items that other people can use. they do all this like they do all this like kind of supporty stuff. Like they can be the frontline fighter, but I don't think I've seen one. I don't think I've ever seen someone play a frontline fighter artificer yet. And then even with the artificer you have in Strixhaven, he does have offensive weaponry, but most of the things that he does is defensive and support.
Yeah, even in his mage tower position, he's designed as a defensive player.
Yeah, so yeah, it's one of those things where a lot of the time there's not an artificer per se, it's just a wizard with magical items. Because like even Lord of the Rings, I wouldn't consider that to be an artificer, really. Like, he's just a wizard. I mean, the Celebrimbor maybe, but like he's pretty much just a wizard.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know. I'm not super familiar with the deep lore of Tolkien, but from what I've seen,
there's a lot of it, though.
Yeah. So like, but from what I've seen is Celebrimbor had other abilities besides forging rings. Like he did other things. So that's all I've seen from him anyway.
Oh. All right. Well, I think that brings us to our last thing, and it's that time for that magic item infomercial.
Okay.
So, you are. What's the item you want to sell here?
Well, let me ask you this question real quick. Do you fear death?
Yes.
Well, I can't help you with that. But here's another question. Do you fear aging? Do you fear becoming decrepit?
Yes.
Awesome. I can help you with that. With the newest item from Science, and Not Science Incorporated, patent pending, we have a very special item where instead of you aging and you being afflicted with all of these terrible, terrible maladies that you get just from living your life, you can take those maladies and transfer them through a soul link to this very special self-portrait that I have. I'm so sold on this item that I've made one for myself, and you can have one too, limit one per customer. Anytime you have anything that goes wrong in your life, you can, with a very powerful spell, transform your life into the ideal one that you want. And everything bad that happens to you, maybe you, instead of you trip and fall down the stairs and break your neck, but you didn't break your neck. Suddenly your portrait's neck just doesn't have the same sturdiness to it. But yes, anything you can think of, we can soul link to this portrait, and you will be forever young and forever happy. And it can be yours only here at Science, and Not Science for the low, low price of 999 million gold. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but there is financing options available, and you will live forever. So really, what is money when you have unlimited time?
I love that you just made Dorian Gray the Lich.
Is that not what he is? Is that not what that story's about?
That is fucking absolutely correct. Oh, that was beautiful. I want that one. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for a second session of Tavern Ramblings. Hopefully we rambled enough for you on the classes of the Arcane. You can join us next time where we talk about the Divine. I'm John, brought to you also with...
Do you fear death?
Yes. Oh, this is so much fun. Once again, we hope you have a good time, and come check us out. Come check out Lizards and Locations and our multitude of campaigns, our beautiful one-shots, and our randomness of Patreon and Ko-fi or coffee events and shenanigans that we get up to. You see us YouTube, Spotify, all the typical things, and we love to see you here. And can we roll yet?
See you.